Hi everyone, watercolour this time. I've done a drawing of the Norfolk windmill, it turned out okay, and I thought I'd have a go at watercolour. I can never usually get this one to look any good with watercolour, so I thought I'd give it another go and just see what happens. So as you can see, I've drawn the picture out and I'm just wetting the paper over with clean water. The paper I'm using is Saunders cold pressed paper. Not my usual Bockingford paper, so we should have some fun and games today. That's a light wash of yellow ochre just on the bottom part of the sky and on the foreground there. Going straight across the buildings. Now I'm going in with some cobalt blue and just sort of letting it diffuse into the damp paper. And I use a darker mix for the top there of cobalt blue, and as I come lower down I'm using cerulean blue, and I use an even darker mix of cobalt blue with a touch of Payne's grey for the very top part of the sky there. And now I'm getting a piece of clean tissue and just dabbing out the pigment from the picture where I don't want it, on the windmill, the rooftops, etc. One thing I did notice with this paper, while it was still wet, even though I'd soaked out some of the moisture from those lighter areas there, the paint was creeping back in. It's quite an absorbent paper, Saunders, so it's something to bear in mind if you use that. It takes some getting used to actually going from one paper to another. You're sort of so used to your regular paper that you forget just how absorbable some of the papers are. Anyway, that's been left to dry, so it's nice and dry now. And I'll mix up some hooker's green with a little bit of yellow ochre and some cobalt blue just for the distant trees there. And I'll make that mix a little bit stronger as I come along. The trees are actually going along to the right there, but they're actually coming slightly more forward as well as they go further along to the right. So I'll just use the same mix, just make it a little bit stronger and a little less blue as well. Carefully painting around the rooftops there so I get a nice clean edge. Just dropping in a few darks there while it's still wet. Again, just doing the same thing there. As you can see, the wash is getting a little bit more green colour about it, not quite so blue. And again, trying to keep a nice straight edge along the tops of the roofs there. I used the same mix for the distant field. I just added a little bit more cobalt blue back into the mix just to give it a more distant colour. And I'm just softening the bottom out there with a little bit of clean water to give a sort of a misty effect. And that's just a little bit of yellow ochre, just in between the buildings there, just to suggest a little bit of sunlight coming through. Now I'm using a light wash of burnt sienna and yellow ochre for the distant roofs there, and for the roofs that are more in the foreground I'm using the same mix but just less water and more pigment, and use that same mix for all of the roofs, all of the foreground roofs here. I'm actually going to let them dry and then go over them with some coloured pencil just to draw in a few roof tiles, and I shall glaze over that with another wash of burnt sienna. So there we go, that's the roofs all done. Well, actually there's one brown coloured roof that's left. I used burnt umber with a little bit of cobalt blue just for that one roof just there. And that's all nice and dry now. And the colour for the windmill is the same as the roofs. It's burnt sienna with yellow ochre, but this time it's a little bit stronger, and as you can see I'm using a brush that's full of water there, water and pigment, because I want the windmill to stay wet. So I'm going to drop some more colours in it while it's still nice and wet, so the colours diffuse in there and give a nice effect. So I'm working quite quickly with a lot of water on the brush just to try and keep everything nice and wet and stop it from drying. Okay, so now that's done and it's still wet, I'm going straight in with some burnt umber, trying to keep it more to the left hand side, which will be the shaded side of the windmill, but you know, allowing it obviously to run into the middle a little bit as well. I take a clean damp brush there and just pull out a little bit of the paint just to lighten that area up on the right hand side where the sun's catching it. Now I'm going in with a bit of Payne's grey and burnt umber on the dark side there of the windmill. At this stage it's starting to dry out a little bit, but I'm really flooding the paint in there and it's still just damp enough to actually do that. Just softening it off and feathering it back there before it completely dries out. And for the buildings I've used cobalt blue and burnt sienna to make a nice sort of neutral grey colour. I'm keeping it reasonably light because I know I should be going back over them again later on in the painting to add some more shadow and to glaze over them a little bit. It's a very useful mix actually, burnt sienna and cobalt blue. You can add more burnt sienna to make it a warm grey and more cobalt blue to make it a bluer grey. So it's a very useful mix. This one I use quite a lot actually. Sometimes I use French ultramarine or cerulean blue or even cadmium red, but generally just, you know, if you want just a standard grey, those two colours work brilliantly together. I actually forgot to paint the front of that building there, so just going over it again. It looks a slightly different colour, but it should dry okay. And it doesn't really matter because, like I say, I'll be glazing over that anyway. Using the same colour just to go underneath the bottom of the roof tiles there. and just painting in the chimneys with the same colour that I used for the roof. Excuse me. Same again, same colour for the walls there. Just burnt sienna, cobalt blue. Just dropping a little bit of darker version of it just on the end there. The same with this one. I've actually got two mixes of this on the palette at the moment, a light wash and a dark wash. This is the light wash just going on. And you'll notice that along the bottom edge there, I'm leaving sort of a ragged edge just to suggest the tops of the reeds or grasses or shrubs just growing up on that wall there. And before it dries, I'll go in and drop in some darks just to sort of bring them out a little bit more. And when I say darks, it's exactly the same mix, but it's just got more pigments in it. There's a close-up of what I mean. Shame I couldn't keep it a little bit steadier, but sorry about that. And that's just a little bit of wall just sticking out there, so that I'll get the same treatment. Putting a few darks in for the doors and the windows. Again, they look a little bit stark at the minute, but I will be glazing completely over all of that with a shadow colour later on. Just dropping in a few more shadows here and there on the chimneys. Just darkening off a little bit underneath the eaves of the roof. Again, it's the same mix, just burnt sienna and cobalt blue. Right, for the little boat that's just there, I used a light wash of cerulean blue. And then back to the grey colour there, just for the inside of the boat. That same grey colour, just for a little bit of shadow just along the edge of the boat there and along the bottom of the boat. Oh yeah, the camera cut out, but all I did was just painted that dark line along the front of the building there, the foreground building, and that was it, so you didn't really miss much. Okay, now everything's dry, I'm going to go over it with some grey coloured pencils. These aren't water soluble, they're just normal coloured pencils made by Kohinoor. It's a set of grey. And I'm just going to basically just follow the line of the roof, the angle of the roof, and I'm just going to draw some lines coming down just to suggest the tiles there. Sort of mid-grey toned pencil. I don't want anything too dark or to stand out, you know, too much. Just to suggest a little bit of detail there. And keeping it very light on the distant buildings there. And I just go across with a couple of horizontal lines, slightly wavy. Same again on this foreground building. You can make the lines slightly wider because the tiles will obviously be slightly bigger because they're further forward in the picture, so they'll appear bigger. I'm using a black pencil now just to go under the eaves and darken off there a little bit. probably overdoing it actually on this foreground building. Probably went a bit too dark there, so I decided just to erase it back a little bit. But bear in mind when you do this, you can glaze over this with watercolour, which is exactly what I do, and it can give, you know, a nice subtle effect. It's not too far forward or, you know, too much in your face or anything. It's just nice and subtle. Darkening off again under the foreground building, or under the roof of the foreground building, should I say. So I've just mixed up another wash of burnt sienna and yellow ochre, and this time I'm dropping a few sort of olive green colours in there, which I just mixed from Hooker's Green and yellow ochre. I'm just dropping it into the burnt sienna mix while it's still wet, to give that effect of moss. It gives a nice aged look to the roofs. I mean, this windmill is, you know, hundreds of years old. I don't think these outbuildings are, but they're certainly very old. So to suggest a little bit of age and character on there, you know, can look quite nice. So that's all the roofs finished, and now I'm using a black pencil. No, it's not a black pencil, sorry, it's a Derwent Studio pencil, and it's gunmetal grey. It's not a water soluble one either, it's just a standard pencil. Just drawing in the darks in the windows there. I could have done that with watercolour, but I just decided to use a pencil instead. I thought I could get a sharper line. And just suggesting a few little joints in the brickwork and a few bricks and things like that. It's almost like drawing Morse code. Just like dots and a dash and a dot and a dash, just sort of random marks sort of running horizontally just to suggest that whole brickwork. Again, I don't want to really add too much detail or it'll just look wrong, but just a little bit, and done subtly, it can look very nice. So don't go too, if you're having a go at this one at home, you know, don't go too dark with this. This is just sort of a medium grey colour, just very lightly applied. And the same on the buildings, just to suggest that Norfolk stonework. I'm keeping it fairly subtle, but I'm pretty much going over all of it. I'm still being mindful that they'll be glazed over later anyway, so but you don't really want to go too dark at this stage with your pencil work. You can always go back in later and add some darker tones and more detail if you wish. Same again on the stone walls there, the distant buildings. Probably a lot of watercolour purists wouldn't, you know, agree too much with what I'm doing here, but you know, I'm not brilliant at watercolour, so I use everything I can to give me an advantage. And I think you know, coloured pencils work really nicely with watercolour actually. They're very compatible, give a nice effect. They can add some nice detail and textures and really enhance your watercolour paintings. I'm using a black pencil now, just to, you know, go into the tops of the windows there, just to darken them off a bit. I'm going down the darker side of the windmill, just to give it more contrast really. But do be careful with black because it can sort of kill areas where you put it. So I've got a piece of tissue there and I'm just kind of rubbing over it to blend it in a little bit more, because I don't want it too black looking. And now the biggest cheat of all, I'm using a white gel pen to draw in the railings and straighten up the window frames. You can actually use white gouache for this, but I prefer a white gel pen, it's just easier. Again, it's not something for the watercolour purist, but this is more of a mixed media technique anyway, so I don't mind using things like this. And now I'm glazing over the buildings with a wash of cobalt blue and cadmium red, just to give a nice sort of purple shadow colour. I'm keeping it more on the blue side as well, not necessarily purple, but sort of a bluey purple colour. Excuse me. And obviously I'm not making it too dark or highly pigmented. I want it to be more of a glaze, so that the detail and the colours underneath will show through. Use the same mix there just to go over that roof, just to darken it up a little bit. And same with the details on the boat. It's the same colour, cobalt blue and cadmium red. And the same colour there for the top of the windmill, just for the shadow. It was a little bit too dark, so I softened it back with a damp brush. Looking at the picture now, I should have made it a lot darker at the back of the white dome there. I should have got a lot more dark blue there. It would have given a nicer contrast, but it looks okay. Now I'm just using a light wash of cobalt blue, just to go over the distant trees, just to blue them off a little bit and to add just a little bit of texture, because they're looking a little bit flat. Again, I'm still trying to be fairly subtle about this. I don't want anything too blue or anything over there, just a nice light glaze. I'm just adding a few shadows there to the sails. That's just a wash of cadmium red. It's far too dark, so I decided to blot it back a little bit with a dry tissue. And again, trying to get some highlights on the sails with the white gel pen. Definitely should have gone darker at the back of the windmill. The sails would have stood out a lot better. but lesson learnt. I'm just drawing in the white brackets underneath the railings there. Just generally going around adding highlights where I think it needs them. Right, so now the dreaded foreground then. Not looking forward to this. This is usually where I go wrong with this picture. Anyway, I'm wetting the foreground all over with clean water. So we'll be going for a wet in wet technique. And then I use a mix of, it's just yellow ochre actually, just neat yellow ochre. And just drop it into the damp paper there and just let it kind of diffuse out. That's to sort of suggest the tops of the reed beds. Same again, just going in with the same colour, just oh actually no, that's burnt umber now, sorry about that, that's burnt umber. And if you noticed, I've split the bristles of the brush open to give more of a grassy effect, more of a random texture to the tops of the reeds there. Just getting more pigment in while the paper's still wet. Using some of the burnt umber around the bottom of the reeds there, and in that dark area in the middle where there's sort of an opening in the reeds or a little pathway or whatever going through. And then I use neat burnt umber just to go across that foreground there. I didn't actually like that, but I actually cropped it off when the picture was finished, so which seemed to actually, you know, make for a better composition actually. I actually got 2 frames of the video the wrong way round, so the next one, the next frame you'll see is the picture actually finished, but I did actually go over this with coloured pencil, which you'll see in the frame after, so it's kind of the wrong way round. So sorry about that, there's a bit of problem with the editing there. Well, there wasn't a problem with the editing, it was a problem with the editor, which was me. Entirely my fault, I got it the wrong way round. So I'm just going in with a little bit of Payne's grey and burnt umber there, just to suggest the darks on the fronts of the reeds. And just dropping the colour in while the paper's still wet. There you go, that's what I mean, that's actually the finished picture there. I went over it with coloured pencils, like ochre colours and grey colours, just sort of in grass strokes, just up and down, just on the front of the reeds there. Nothing special, didn't sort of really miss much. Basically that's it there. I was just sort of messing about with it there. Look, you can see I'm just sort of drawing them in there. But anyway, that's a complete finished painting. Hope you like it, hope it was useful to you. And thanks very much for viewing, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.